Times change, people change, and so the martial arts must change too. At least that's what Gichin Funakoshi thought. But what about kobudo? Hey, what's up? I'm Ken. This is kenfuTV. Every week I make videos on the martial arts, philosophy, training, technique, and you're watching Ken Learns Kenfu, where I kind of reflect on my thoughts and understandings in the martial arts as time goes on. So elsewhere on the channel, Stuart James Gray left this comment saying, Ken Sensei, I was looking at your playlist and I noticed that you teach Kali. I teach modern arnis. I'm wondering if you also teach kobudo or if you've done the same thing that I've done and replaced kobudo with Kali. In my case, I've replaced my kobudo with arnis. I just don't have the time to teach everything, so I teach the things most likely to be beneficial and applicable in today's milieu of violence. So a really interesting question, and I'm liking seeing these kind of questions in the comments. Over time, I'll talk more about these kind of things. I think this is really great that we're starting to have these conversations. So first, yes, I teach Kali. I teach Kali in the Tobosa School Kali Eskrima, the Kasag system, under Maestro Michael Mulconnery, mainland director here in the US. The art comes out of Hawaii. I'm a huge proponent of it. It's probably my number 2 when it comes to the trifecta of what I train: Okinawan Karate, Kali Eskrima, Jiu-Jitsu. That said, I also teach kobudo. My kobudo training comes from Seo Shorin-ryu and the WKKJO. Each of those systems has its own kobudo lineage: Seo Shorin-ryu, Yamane-ryu, Mariyoshi, WKKJO, Mariyoshi under Odo Sensei. And we still teach that. I have strong feelings about kobudo. Now, I haven't been teaching it as much recently for the same reasons in that comment. Time. It's difficult to teach everything. First and foremost, I find Kali to be very effective and incredibly fun. But it's also something very important to me. It's something I'm devoted to. So it gets time every week to train and teach and pass on. Not necessarily as a combination of the other things I'm doing. There are people that are training just that, and I want to be able to give that to them in its fullest. So for me, those are separate. They're kept separated. Karate kobudo trained specifically as what it is. Kali Eskrima trained specifically as what it is, not mixing. So naturally, if you train both of those under me, then there's going to be an overlap, not in teaching so much as it's a stylistic approach by the person who's teaching it. There is overlap in my body. So you're going to see it in both places if you have the perspective of looking at it from both angles. If you only look at it in one way, you'll probably never notice. But I think it's important to keep them separate and be true to them. I'm not trying to combine all the arts I've trained in into one mega art. I think there's a lot lost when you separate all the pieces, right? The curriculum, the stuff that is trained, what makes up that art, the way that it's trained, the whole ecosystem surrounding that, all make up what the art is itself. So if you just pick out the pieces that you like, then you're not doing that art anymore. You're just doing the techniques now. And I don't want to do that. I want to continue to pass the art down. So in both cases, I've got an art over here and an art over here, and they get passed down independently of themselves. For time reasons, the kobudo we haven't been doing as frequently. It's a requirement in the Okinawan Karate that we teach that you have kobudo. So really it gets taught in 2 places: in seminars done periodically, and in higher level karate training, the kobudo becomes a part of it. There's a great overlap. A lot of people will say that the weapon is just an extension of your body, so the kobudo is no different. And I think that's true for the most part. Anything that's like that, you're going to have that level of translation of empty hand to weapon. But it is its own art. It does move its own way. And when you look at weapons, it's really important to look at this weapon versus someone without a weapon. Some people do kind of get up about that. If you don't have a weapon, then why should I fight you with a weapon? That's immoral or something. I personally don't agree. It all depends on what your plan is. Are you actively trying to hurt me to a level that I can't stop? And a weapon will help be the equalizer here. In that case, it's valid. In a consensual fight, if you show up and go, hey, we're gonna fight, I'm gonna box you right now, and then I come up and go, cool, I'm gonna bring a sword, then yeah, it's different. But that's consensual violence. Non-consensual violence, you don't care what happens to me at the end, so I don't care what tools I use to get the thing done. But different weapons versus weapons versus weapons, same weapon versus same weapon versus different weapon, same weapon versus no weapon. All of those things have their own idiosyncrasies that make them different. And so you have to pay attention to those. So it's not a one-for-one change. There are attributes to that. Do I think that you could replace kobudo with Kali? Probably. When you look at the Filipino martial arts, they adopted a lot of those weapons. Now, historically, I don't know where a lot of that came from. If some of those weapons they already had, or if it, just like anything else, became exposed to those weapons through other cultures and adopted those weapons. But they had, obviously, the blade and the stick. They had the staff, the long stick, right? They had spears. That was 100% in their culture. Look back at Lapu-Lapu and Magellan and all of that stuff. They had the tabak toyak, also known as the chaku or the nunchaku. They have shield-based arts. They have a lot of different things. So a lot of the kobudo weapons are there, but they're trained differently. I think Kali's a little quicker to pick up. It's easier to adopt. It's easier to translate from one weapon to another. But at the end of the day, it is different than kobudo. And so you also have to consider, do I also want to preserve parts of this art? Do I want to preserve the traditions and carry on a piece of this history? If that's one of your goals, if that's one of the ways that you train and what's important to you, then you should make sure that you continue to train kobudo. If your goal is just pragmatic martial arts and you need functional system quick, I obviously believe in karate as a striking and grappling art. I think that it's incredible and very, very valuable. When it comes to weapons, Kali's probably going to be faster at getting into you and becoming functional inside your body, inside your motion. It's very, very practical, and it would make perfect sense that if you want to be able to rapidly deploy those skills, it's a great way to go. Okay, so why train Kali? Kali is very effective, no nonsense, and I really appreciate the training method, which involves a lot of different weapons, or the lack of weapons, different length weapons, different types of weapons. But for the most part, they're really trained the same way. So you're not learning a certain method of movement for this weapon and a different method of movement for this weapon. And for the most part, there's a strong overlap, and you're learning the same method of movement for all weapons. I think it's incredibly practical, quick to learn, quick to deploy, quick to appropriate to other weapons if needed to. And so ultimately you hear me saying quick repeatedly, and there's the answer. If you need a weapon system or a fighting system that gets you quickly to that point, Kali's great. It's a really great art for that. Kali Ice Cream also has its own traditions. So if you like the art, if it speaks to you, it's important to you, then it has its own traditions that you can pass and preserve and carry on with that history. So it's still really great. It's a great option, and I highly encourage you to check it out. Even if it's not your primary art, go look at it. I find it incredibly valuable and super fun. So why train kobudo? Well, here's my feelings in kobudo. So one, I grew up watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so that was a big deal to me the day that I first trained all 4 of the Turtles' weapons. Yeah, it felt like pretty hot stuff, let me tell you. The truth is, in kobudo, there's much more than those 4 weapons. You could also look at Leonardo's weapon as not being specifically Okinawan, more into the samurai arts, not the Okinawan arts, but I digress. The Okinawan weapons do have quite a few, boat oars and the tekos, which are kind of like brass knuckles, but they're made of like a horse stirrup. You have things like the tumfa. That one's very indicative of kobudo. So you have a lot of different weapons. I think we trained something like 19 different weapons when it comes to that stuff. And so lots of different things there, which is very, very cool, working a bunch of those things. Now, the negatives, here's where people come in and they say, yeah, but most of those weapons aren't in use anymore. So why is it important to learn those weapons if I'm not even going to be exposed to them or use them? Here's my feeling. My feeling is when it comes to kobudo weapons, while those might historically have been a particular weapon that people carried or used at that time that you were likely to encounter, whereas now you don't, but I still think they're great tools to learn weapon categories. At the end of the day, to me, one of the best ways to train weapons is to break it down into categorically speaking, the method of the weapon works. So you have impact weapons, you have cutting or slashing weapons, you've got flexible weapons, you've got piercing weapons, right? You've got these different types of things. And those are kind of your main 4 categories. You've got some other things. And more importantly, most weapons are going to be in multiple categories, but they're going to be designed for one thing in particular, that thing that they're best at. So look at the bow. The bow, obviously an impact-based weapon. It's not good at piercing. It certainly doesn't cut. And it's not flexible, but it can bludgeon and impact all day long. Now, you put a spear tip on the end. Now you've got a piercing option, right? But most of the weapon actually still stays the same. You break it into sections, like Sansetsu-kon, the 3-section staff. Now you've got flexible and length, right? The bow, one of its features is how long it is. You look at the sai. The sai was a bludgeoning weapon. Hollywood wants to make those into blades and make it into more of a cutting weapon, but it was a bludgeoning weapon. And with those tips, it had the ability to do piercing, kind of rough piercing, because those are broad tips. They're not pointy, but they were also for weapon trapping. That's what those kind of pieces on the end are for. You can trap other weapons and protect your hands. while you take weapons away from other people. So that's a very interesting thing. The nunchaku, flexible weapon, portable, very, very fast. Shorter, kind of a mid-range, right? It's not terribly long range, but it can hit from pretty far away while still being able to be folded down and packed pretty easily. But in close, it changes. It's got the ability to tie up and choke and do things like that just a regular stick, well, you can do some of those things, but it's different. The way a flexible weapon is capable of wrapping around something is unique to it. Then you have your swords and things like that, your slashing and cutting weapons. Blades, there's many types of blades, but they function the same, right? How are you going to leverage that weapon against me? A bludgeoning weapon, you have to be able to generate force and momentum. A cutting weapon, you don't. You don't need force and momentum to cut. You just need proximity. It needs to touch me, and it needs to be sharp. If it can do those things, you don't actually need a lot of force to cut somebody. A blade never forgets to cut. Piercing weapons, or weapons with a piercing focus, they tend to need to be straight on. They need that actual piercing, thrusting motion. Flexible weapons, they can change distance and range quickly. They can be produced out of nowhere because of the fact that they're so easy to conceal. And then they have different ways of trapping the hands. But in order for them to be good, the nunchaku, as an example, as a bludgeoning weapon, it's got to be able to generate that speed momentum that a bludgeoning weapon category would do. Whereas in tight, you don't need that speed momentum. You just need to actually just get a hold of something. And so each of these categories has its own features. And I think it's important that if you understand how those features work, then you also can start to understand how to manage those features, how to leverage them, and how to defend against them. So while it's steeped in tradition, and there's a lot of things, your katas and different things that you're going to do while you gain that knowledge, that is not strictly practical. It's not directly applicable. It's secondary to the function of the weapon itself. As you get exposed to all those different weapons, you're really getting exposed to weapon categories, and that's a big deal. So yes, you might not carry a bow or nunchaku or tonfo or whatever. But if you start to recognize the function of those weapon categories, how they are applicable, how you can use them, then you can take that knowledge and transfer it into any weapon of opportunity, something that you might carry with you, something you might find in that situation through your understanding of the way to leverage types of weapons. You know, anything can be a weapon if you try hard enough is something people say. But knowing how to leverage it well comes from understanding the attributes of different types of weapons. So I still think it has value, and I like the tradition and I like preserving history. So I continue to teach kobudo. I think it's important from a preservation standpoint, but I also do think that there are better weapon systems that are going to leverage some of that stuff faster. The Filipino martial arts is definitely one of those. So what do you think? Do you think that we should be getting rid of kobudo and in favor of weapon arts that are more street ready, so to speak? Or do you think we should keep it? Do you think that tradition is really important? And what do you think of the idea of weapon categories? Have you really ever considered it that way? And what are your thoughts on that? Hit me in the comments. Let's talk about it. In the meantime, thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like it. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe. We do stuff like this every week, sometimes multiple times a week. So be sure to hit that bell so you get the notifications when new videos get released. Otherwise, Ken Learns Kenfu, the video you're watching now, these kind of reflections that I do are released every Monday. At the end of the video, I'll link playlist where you can go see some of the past ones. So Stuart James Gray, thanks for posting that comment. I really appreciate it. Generated some good thoughts. I hope this was helpful to you. I hope it answered some of those questions. Hit me in the comments if you've got more to say and want to share your thoughts. If you're not Stuart and you've got questions like this, hit them in the comments and maybe we'll do more of this where this stuff is dropped into these videos and we talk about it. That's it for now. Catch you in the next one.